Hi, everybody. My name is Bret Bays. I'm a character TD at the Walt Disney Animation Studios. Prior to that, I used to actually work at Maxon US doing technical support. Did that for about 4 years. Been using Cinema 4D for, I don't know, like 12 years or so. Cinema is my preferred app of choice when it comes to doing rigging. I just am most comfortable in there. And today what we're going to talk about is creating sort of a character rigging pipeline inside of Cinema 4D. And the project we're going to be talking about is one I've been a part of for a while. It's called the Ottoman. The Ottoman is a short film using Cinema 4D. Let's see here. It started in 2007-ish by Mike Stam. He, as the director, came up with the idea. He wrote a treatment. That script basically caught the eye of Dimos Vercelis, who became our animation director. Dimos is an animation mentor, so he met me at Animation Mentor and recruited me on the project. I've been on the project since like 2006. No, 2009, sorry. And I was doing rigging predominantly. I've done some layout, done some animation on the project. After a long pre-production process, we began animation with some folks. And we turned to Kickstarter to help fund our project. And last year, thanks to generous support from companies like Maxon and Insidium, we were able to be funded, not only by these people, but also viewers like you. Sorry, I've been watching a lot of PBS because of my child. So the Ottoman Project has this kind of unique 2D sort of style, influenced heavily by Mobius. And these are our main characters. We have 4 main characters. We also have these crazy mechas that all have to be rigged, and we had a very small pool of people to do it. So this is kind of our journey to establish our pipeline. So when I started, I was first tasked with creating Previs rigs for our main characters. Right. And when I joined the project, I'd barely been rigging inside of Cinema 4D. I was very new to it. I was kind of faking my way through everything. But they saw me and they thought I could help out, and so they gave me the task of creating Previs rigs. And Previs rigs are meant for layout animation, right? The idea is you have a really rough approximation of your character, and you want to use that to sort of frame your camera and your staging and stuff like that. It's really more for the camera work than it is for the animation. So being new, I created a rig, something along these lines, not terribly complicated. But we needed something better visually than this. So my first thought was, okay, I can grab all my bone joints here. And Cinema's got all these different display types for bones. And I thought, hey, you know, other programs, when they showcase just the rigs as joints, they usually use boxes. So we can use boxes. This will be a great way to display our characters, right? This was a very young, naive me, thinking that this would be awesome. So I started grabbing my joints and, you know, scaling them up to sort of fit the proportions. Like, this is the head, so it should be kind of big and kind of fat, yada, yada, yada. Didn't really represent our character too much, but what I eventually came up with was something along these lines. Open up another folder. So I eventually came up with something sort of like this. This is a rough approximation of a character. It can be used for staging and all that jazz. And I showed it to Mike, and he said, hey, that's really great. You know what? We'll use those for our extras because they weren't modeled yet. And he said, but we really need to really sort of keep this guy's look and feel, because when you're doing your staging, if you're in a really close-up shot, you know, you got to be able to frame knowing where the nose is, knowing where the mouth is, all these sorts of things. So it was like a, hey, good job, but keep going sort of thing. And so kind of was thinking back for a while, like, oh, how can I do this? What would be a better way? I remembered learning that Cinema's joints, in addition to all these modes, you have this Polygon mode. All right, and what this will do, let me turn this off. What that'll do is actually make all of these objects polygonal objects, right? So if I go into points mode, I can grab this point, and I can move it and adjust it. I can cut it. I can add geometry to it. Do any sort of thing that you could do to any polygon object. Nothing terribly special. And so I was sitting there thinking, oh man, I guess I'm going to have to try to model this from this. And then I remembered that there's a plugin out there by Michael Welter. It's a very old plugin. If you've used Cinema for a long time, it's been around for quite a long time. Switch this back to box, switch this back to length. And that plugin is called Copy Paste Polygons, right? Which is right here. What this does is it allows you to easily just copy polygons from one object to the same object or to another object. It doesn't really matter. So I took this, and what that meant is I could grab my character. Whoa, get out of the knife tool first. So I could grab my character. I could make a selection of some sort, like this represents sort of the bicep, forearm, or excuse me, upper arm area. I can say copy polys. Let me hide them again. And I can select the corresponding joint, which is actually this guy. And I can say paste polys. Interesting. Why that happened? Oh, because it's not in Polygon mode, that's why. So with it in Polygon mode, I can say paste polys, and it will actually paste the geometry there. So now I have the actual silhouette of my character in the arm and in the joint. If I were to actually move this controller, right, it follows along like the joint would. So you kind of extrapolate this out, and you wind up with something like this, right, which is the exact representation and silhouette of our model, but without any deformation, right, which means it's fast, which is really important for Previs because, it's not about the performance of the character, it's about the staging of the camera. So the faster you can do it, the faster you can iterate on the camera. So you have just this sort of cut-up version, but it gives me the silhouette and everything I was looking for there. So I showed that to Mike. He said that was great, that works. I did it on all 4 of the characters, and then my next task was to do the main body rigs. And eventually that led to taking over the face rigs that some other folks had started. And so I'll bring up the full rig. Now this rig is fairly complicated. It's got, let's see how many objects we have here. It's got something like, oh, we hit the attribute limit. Let's just change that to who has number lock turned off? Let's do 3,000. All right, so we have about 1,500 objects in here. We have roughly 534 constraints, 20 IK tags, 28 IK spline tags. So if you do all that math, that's what? 600 and some change priorities and expressions that you have to try to manage, right? And when I say manage, I mean that I have to take the bulk of this rig and apply it to, all 4 of those characters, right? Let me bring that up real quick. All 4 of these characters, which is kind of time-consuming when you consider all 4 of these guys are bipeds. That means they have 2 arms, 2 legs, 5 fingers, a face rig, right? The only differences between these characters are in their clothing and their hair. This wife here actually has dreadlocks in her other outfit, so that was a fun challenge. But that meant I had to convert that 1,500 objects and that 600 priorities. I had to convert it to each character, and when it's that complicated, it's not so easy to do. You can't just disable expressions and move things around because the hierarchy's all over the place. So I was having to do this manually because this was back in release 11, I think, is what we were on at the time. And the process of converting this rig to one of the other characters was probably around 24 hours straight of work, like dedicated time doing that, because I have to make sure that they're all named the same, they're all connected the same, all working the same, all looking the same. So 24 hours, 4 characters, that's almost a week's worth of work. But it also brought in some other problems, right? I mentioned the complexity side of it. That's one problem, how complicated these rigs are. The other problem was the consistency side of it, right? Like I said, I need everything to be named the same. That way, if I need to write scripts that do specific things on the rig, that it's consistent throughout. But when I'm dealing with 1,500 objects, I'm prone to making mistakes, right? I can't iterate 1,500 times and be expected to do it right every time. So consistency was a problem, making sure that everything was named the same and connected the same throughout all 4 rigs. The other issue was a management problem, right? By building these 4 separate rigs, as we got it into animators' hands, if a problem arose with the rig, that meant we would have to fix it 4 times, right? And if it takes me an hour to fix it in one rig, it's going to take me an hour to fix it in the other 3 rigs. So we're looking at 4 hours of work. So it's not ideal, and that's assuming they're consistent, right? Which they weren't. Quite frankly, I made many mistakes. So we needed some sort of way to corral all of this together into one easy-to-manage place. And that's when Release 13 came out, which is my all-time favorite release, because it gave us the character object, right? Character object is the bee's knees. I could give a whole other talk on the character object and why it rules, but I won't for now. What I'll do, though, is I'll show you our template. Right, and it's very complicated looking, but it actually helps out in a variety of ways, right? First of all, it helps out with the complexity side of things because I only have to deal with, for the most part, half the rig, right? I don't have a right side for my arms and my legs. I do for some of the clothing because that was just a little bit easier to manage that way. But for the base core rigs for all the characters, I eliminated half of the rig already off the bat just by switching to the character object. So complexity-wise, has gone down. Consistency-wise, they're all using the exact same character templates. They're all using the exact same names, the same setups. Everything's the same across the board. So I know that the names are consistent. So that solves that problem. And then from a management standpoint, I only actually have to fix it on this file. And that's 1 time versus 4 times, so automatically fixing that. So the character object came in, swept through all of my problems, and made it so much better. And this process that, like I said, took about 24 hours to do, got reduced to, if I can bring in the file here. So this was, it got reduced to probably about 30 minutes, right, per character. So 24 hours, 30 minutes, that's already a huge time saver. So what I could do is I could bring in my old rig, and these joints sort of represent where my old rig was, and it gives me all the locations of where things should go, right? This is where my clavicle is, this is where my forearm starts, all those sorts of things. So then when I start building a character, I'm going to just do this real quick here. Bring the hand. All right, so then I'm just dealing with objects like this. This isn't the entire rig I've built in here, just because I'm trying to make sure I'm not going too slow. But all I'd have to do now is turn on snapping, turn on axis snapping. Just do this here. 3D snapping, axis snapping. And now I could just click on a handle and snap it to its corresponding place. So this is the process of adjusting the rig to each character now, is just this snapping process, which, like I said, 30 minutes, way better than 24 hours. Now, as far as the sort of maintaining this rig goes, what would happen is if I had to fix something in the rig, I'd have to rebuild the rigs, right? I'd have to do just the same process you just saw me do, which is really easy to build the rig and then just adjust it. So as we're iterating more and more, suddenly that 30 minutes, which seemed super cool and super fast at the time, is wearing on me, right? That's becoming 30 minutes for 4 characters, 2 hours, 2 hours of work to just fix, right? So I started looking at this and thinking, man, this part is so slow. Like, apparently I've already forgotten that it took me 24 hours before, but man, 30 minutes, God, it's so slow. And really, the reason why it's slow is because of the fingers and the face. So if I show you the face here, too. Right? Like, look at all these handles in here I have to adjust. The legs are easy. There's 3 little snap things. That'd be a piece of cake. But then you've got all the fingers. You've got all these. Look at this. You got to zoom in here just to actually see it. And this started to introduce kind of a consistency problem as well. Like, I maybe missed the wrong thing that I'm snapping to. It's not precise enough and slow at this point. We get really spoiled when things go fast, right? And then suddenly that fast becomes very slow. So I started thinking, how can I streamline this even further? Well, I was thinking about it a lot having set up the template, I'm really familiar with the character template and the character component tags, which is how all this is set up. And I knew that each one of these handles that I'm clicking on, they actually represent a physical object within my rig, right? If I select this guy here, I choose scroll to first active, it actually takes me to an object in my scene. This is an object, which means it has transforms, it has a matrix, it has a world position, it has a world orientation, right? So that means if I put it where it's supposed to go over here, right? And that's where it's supposed to go because I already rigged it once, and I know that's where it needs to be. There's got to be some sort of way I can take this information and store the global position and rotation and just snap back to that position later, right? And do it through a script. Well, there is. If you, let me see here. Inside of the component tag, which is how all the rigs are built, there's this adjustments tab, and this is where all of this sort of thing is handled. And if you collapse a couple of groups, there's this handles group, and these represent all of the dots that you see here for that particular component. So there's an arm component, a hand component, leg, spine, face, all sorts of components. But I have access to all these, right? Through Python, I can get all this information, right? If I can get all of these objects, that means I can actually get all their positions. So that's exactly what I set out to do, is to create a script that would allow me to not only snap to these positions, but also generate those position files, right? So I ended up creating a series of scripts, really. There's one script that will, let's see if this is the file. One script will generate the adjustment handles, right? So if I load in a file here, and I won't really demonstrate how this all works because this is the less important side of it, but I have these things called snap guides, and inside the snap guides groups is just a flat list of a ton of objects, and all these objects represent an adjustment handle, right? In fact, they're named the exact same way as the object that's an adjustment handle, just given an underscore snap prefix. And the reason why I did it that way is so I could find that object, right? Because I can gather all that information from the component tag. I gather that object's name, and I just search for that object's name plus underscore snap. And if I can find that object, I should snap it to that object. So what that does for us is, let's see. It gives us all these objects, so we just store all these nulls in our scene. They're not doing anything, they're not deforming, they're not even moving. They're just in the scene. And that's just mainly for my use. So what that means I can do, which file? Is I have the snap guides in here, and I'll show you how it all works. I create my character, building it the same way you saw me do it a second ago, except I'm going to go ahead and scale them to the right size. And if I could go back in time and redo all these scripts, I'd do it in a more efficient way than what I have right now. Let me load my palette again. What I have is a series of scripts. Right, this is a script that will create this, the adjustment handles. In fact, I can demo that real quick. So create the root, spine, the bendy legs, bendy arms. I'll just do those for demonstrating that script. What I can do is I can say, I need to select all my components here. I switch to full hierarchy. What that does is it selects every object that has the component tag, and then the script will basically grab the component tag and generate the handles. So I say create snap handles. It automatically creates a snap handles group. Every object that is an adjustment handle is found inside of there. And if I hide this, you can see that for snapping purposes, like to do it manually myself, they're just these little null objects. They have just a little display so I can find them easier. But the nice thing about this is if I find that my adjustments aren't working very well, I can just adjust any one of these null objects, and then it will update the rest when I rebuild again. So doing that means that I can take that 30-minute process of adjusting the rig. Right, and keep in mind that was just adjusting the rig. That wasn't transferring weights or anything like that. Revert to saved. If with the snap handles there, I can now do the following. Just build this. Just say root, spine, IKFK leg bendy. He needs his towel. It's part of his custom clothes. Do the arm, do the jacket, and then do his hand. All right. And again, because of how I structured this when I was first doing it, I have to do the face separately, which if I could go back, I'd fix that. But now I just switch into adjust mode and I say, snap the spine component. And you can notice immediately the spine is now adjusted into place. I can say, snap the leg component, and you'll see the leg jumps. Do the arm, do the hands. Hands are all in place. Select my spine and just build my face. Into adjust mode, snap face. So that 30-minute process of rebuilding and adjusting to my character has just been reduced down to like 30 seconds. So it takes me 2 minutes to rebuild every character, which is very helpful for me because at the time I was riding on a train. I had a very finite amount of time I could actually do any of this work. And so being able to strip it down to 2 minutes for all of them is extremely helpful. Now there were still 2 problems that arose from this. One of which is already fixed, right? The Ottoman Project has been nice because it's actually driven a lot of changes and development inside of Cinema 4D. The advanced biped template, if you've ever used it, is heavily influenced by this rig here. I did this rig, and then I did the advanced biped rig based off of that. And then other things that I'll talk about later. But the 2 problems we had, and at this time we were using release 13, we had a problem where the controllers weren't being frozen, right? Frozen coordinates are really, really important to animators. It gives them a clean way to zero out their controller or zero out their character and get back into the bind pose. So if they maybe mess up their pose a little too much, they can just zero it out and it's back to its default position. The other sort of benefit is in the F curves, right? By having everything start at 0, you've sort of normalized the display in the F curves. Whereas maybe if your arm is at 500 units in Y, but your foot's at negative 500 units in Y, and you try to frame both of them in the F curve, it's going to be this massive distance, and you're actually not going to be able to see the detail in your curves. So you'd have to like zoom in on one or the other kind of a thing. So in my head, I thought, okay, well, we can fix this. All you have to do, double-clicking on the character object selects all the controllers for you, which is really handy. And you could just freeze objects that way. But you can't. See, Release 13 gave us another really great feature, which were updates to the protection tag, right? So if I scroll to this object, right, we have a protection tag on here. And you notice I'm in the Move tool, and these axes are kind of grayed out. They're darkened a little bit. I can't actually move this object anymore, right? But if I go to Rotate, I can rotate it. And this is really handy because this allows you to set up controls in ways that you don't want animators. Like if you don't want an animator to translate something, you need to lock it because otherwise they'll translate it. So this is a really handy feature for the rigs, but it causes a problem when you're trying to freeze them, right? So if I go in here, and you can see my position coordinates aren't frozen here. If I just try to click Freeze All, notice that my controller has just jumped. And that's because the protection tag is trying to protect the coordinates that was in, and I'm resetting it, and then it's going to reset it again. So it's going to keep offsetting it every time I freeze it. So this was really annoying because that meant I had to come up with some other solution to do that besides just double-clicking and clicking a button. So the way you fix this is you have to select your object, you have to go to the protection tag itself, and you have to switch these from whatever's locked to be none. Now, thankfully, you don't have to deal with anything over here. Like if you've set up custom values here, just setting it to none will fix it. And now I can click on it and say freeze. Everything's 0. It didn't jump. So that's how we can do that. So we needed a way to do this on all of our controllers in a single swoop. So I ended up developing a script that would do just that. Basically, the script takes whatever I have selected, and it says, hey, do you have a protection tag on you? If it doesn't, it just ignores it. It freezes it as usual and goes on to the next object. But if it does have a protection tag, what it does is it finds the undo back. It finds whatever values these are currently, and it stores them just for a time being, and it sets them all to none. Then it will freeze it, and then it will reset it back to what it did. So this was cool. This meant I could take, some selected objects here. I know all my FK stuff has some sort of protection tag, and I could say freeze selected, and you can see here everything's at 0. One problem I had personally with this is I didn't want another script to have to run, right? I already have all of these scripts I have to run every time I build. I don't want to have to remember, a 7th script to run. So I was trying to figure out, is there a way we could automate this even further? And it turns out there is, because the character object is awesome, right? If I go back into the template, and if you look on any of the component tags, there's this Python tab. This is part of what I think makes the character object super unique as far as an auto rigging system goes, because you have a visual way to work, but you also can work in a coding way if that's how you prefer. So there's this Python tab, and it allows you to execute Python code. And there's certain functions that the character object will run, and that you can override to do your bidding, basically. If you right-click and choose Show Help, for some reason it's in the help and not in the SDK docs. I don't know why, but maybe in the future it will be. But there's a list of functions in here that you can overwrite and do different things. And the one that's really intriguing to me is this def mode change. This thing gets run every time you switch every time you switch out of these modes, this function gets run. So I can override it. And it gives you some globals that you can use. It can show you the old mode that you were in and the new mode you're in. So this is very helpful for us, because in the Python tab, I could basically say, hey, if I'm switching the mode and the old mode was adjust mode, that means I've just adjusted my character, so I should freeze everything. So if we scroll down a bit here, we say, we're overriding our mode here, and we say if O mode, which is the global here, is the adjust mode, then we should do effectively what that script I wrote is doing. So I just basically took that script and put it into here. And so now every time I rebuild and exit adjust mode, all my controllers are frozen for me. So that solved that problem for us. There was still one other problem, right? And that problem was that every time I rebuild, I get rid of the old character object, right? I delete it, I remove it. When you remove it, though, what that means is all the weight tags that are here are empty, because I've deleted all the joints that are influencing that object. So we needed some sort of way to import and export the weights for all of our meshes when I do a rebuild. And natively, Cinema 4D didn't have a way to do this at the time. So I relied on Mr. Rick Barrett for, he developed a script for someone else that he found out that I could use. And that script would allow you to take an object that had a weight tag, and you could export that to a file and save that file somewhere, which means that you could then also load that file in, and it will recreate the weight tag and add all your weights back on. So really handy script. Now the problem with that script, though, and it's not really the script's fault, but I have how many objects here, right? We got a ton of objects here that need weight tags, right? Give or take 16 objects probably, right? So having to run a script to import each thing individually means I'm having to run a script 16 times in a rig build, which is far too many times, right? So what I ended up doing is taking Rick's script and modifying it in ways that would allow me to import and export all of the weights for every object in a single move, right? So what that means is I have, and I can show you the structure for this, I have this Ottoman weights folder, and inside of this folder is just a ton of objects, right? And they all have a name that corresponds to a name in the scene file. This allows me to basically go object by object, grab that object's name, look for the file that's named the same thing, and if there's a match, to import the script. So what we do Let me revert. Delete all the weight tags. I can select the topmost object for my model hierarchy, and I can run this import weights from directory, and it just asks me, hey, pick a folder where all the weights files are. So I go in here and I say Ottoman weights, that's where they all are. And I run it, and it does its thing, and you can see it automatically generated all the weight tags for me. And now if I just grab my mesh and move it, characters' weights have still been preserved. So it's still another script I have to run, but it's one script instead of 16 times kind of a thing. I can live with it. So that means we solved all these problems, right? Going way, way back, 24 hours of work to try to transfer one rig to another, reduced down to 30 minutes at one point, reduced down to this. We're going to do it live. I'm going to time it. All right, let's see. And go. So that took under 40 seconds to rebuild the character from scratch and do it really quickly. That's pretty awesome. Now, the really cool thing about this, though, is that I showed you before, we have these really badass mechas in here as well. They have rigs. They have problems with the rig that require them to be rebuilt as well. So I actually can take the same process that we did for our humanoid characters here and do the exact same thing on one of our characters, right? So there's no weight tags, there's no rig in this file, so I can quickly build that as well. This one takes, I think, even less time. I say the scorpion, I say the front claw, do 1, 2, 3, 4 legs, adjust mode, snap the scorpion components in there. That's done. Rebuild this, do the same thing, same script, but I choose the scorpion weights this time. And it's going to churn for a little bit because this is a much denser mesh. It takes its time thinking. Drink a little water while I wait. All right, and it's done. So now I can grab a controller here, and sure enough, it's rigged. So even these objects these rigs that are not bipeds are leveraging the character object in the exact same way as bipeds, and we're being able to rebuild and readjust on the fly very quickly. So that's that. Oh yeah, so the next issue was leaving the sort of rig building side of things and moving into getting animation tools and tips and tricks that they wanted. And one of the things they always were bugging me for was they wanted to have a GUI picker, right? GUI picker, or a visual selector as we call it in cinema, is like a little UI that has all your controllers that you can click on and animate. Allows you to hide everything in the viewport, work a little bit easier that way. And they kept asking for it, and I kept telling them no, because every time I rebuild, right, it's the same problem as the weight tag, right? If I remove the rig, then that visual selector is going to be empty. And that means I have to set it up again. And there's unfortunately no way to do it through Python. So I was ready to just write it off and say, tough, deal with it, head down, power through kind of a thing. But one of our animators came up with a really terrific solution that I find really useful. Where is it? So when I build a rig, I save it out, and that becomes what we call our rig file, right? That gets saved somewhere. And then what our animator eSide came up with is, well, why don't we reference in this that rig and then build the visual selector on top of it? That way, every time you do a rig build, you just reload the Xref, and it will update, and it will preserve all the links of the visual selector. And so sure enough, that's exactly what we did. We reference in our rig. And so when it comes time for animation, we create what is called a GUI file, which is basically a file that references in the rig file, but has the visual selector applied to it. And so when we are setting up our animation scenes, we will reference in the GUI file, and they'll animate on that file. So I have the visual selector here, and you can see, I can grab it, and it will automatically select everything for me. If I lock this, say, hey, grab me the nose, grab me the brow, whatever. So this was a cool, sort of ingenious way that I didn't think of, but one of our animators did. And the nice thing is you could use this for a couple other things as well. If you've ever used the CV pickwalk scripts, you could set up your rig for pickwalking this way as well by doing it on a referenced rig file. So the next thing that we kind of ran into is we started doing animation, and we were having to iterate on the rig still, and there would come times when the Xrefs would break. This was early on in the Xrefs, I think release 13 or early 14. Since then, this has all pretty much been hammered out for us for the most part. But what would happen is I would update the rig, and when they tried to reload it, for some reason, the whole rig would just kind of explode, right? We don't know exactly why, but my hunch is, and I'll save this tip for you guys, in your Xref, go into the Options tab, and under Modify, these are all the things you're saying that the user can modify from the original file that you're referencing. I'm pretty sure that 99% of our problems stemmed from having hierarchy turned on. Right? By having hierarchy turned on, it meant that the user or the scene file that we've referenced in is going to be, the hierarchy can be modified in that master scene file instead of taking it from the rig. So if I'm adding new things to the rig, they're not going to come in because the hierarchy is controlled outside of that file. So little tip, turn that off. Don't ever use it probably. But we turned that off, and then Maxon also updated things in release 14. They're really stable now, so we haven't had as much problems. But this still was a problem that we had to solve at the time, so we came up with a couple of ways to do this. We needed some way to take that exploded rig and take the animation from it and apply it back to a new fresh rig. And surprisingly, even though the rig was completely mangled, right, like it looked nothing correct, all of the animation data was still correct. Like all the key values were still correct. So I could take the key values and apply it to a new Xref. So there was two ways we kind of went about this. You can first create a new Xref, and I would reference in our GUI file. And the first thing I do is I need to make sure that I'm in kind of the same space. So I put the Xref in the same hierarchy level as the old one, same coordinates as well. So I just copy the position. Oops. Undo. Oh, whoa. I take the position, take the rotation. I can say Control-C to copy, except I want to do it on this one because that's the one that actually has the difference. Control-C, click here, still selected, Control-V. That didn't work. Control-C, Control-V, there. So the Xrefs themselves are in the same position and location in world space. And then you saw me do it once before, but you double-click on the character object. That selects all your controllers. You can see that it has all of my keyframe data down here in the power slider. Control-A, right-click, copy. Do the same on the new Xref. Double-click, right-click, paste in place. Refresh my view, and it's transferred the animation, right? This worked for 90 to 95% of the cases, right? This was pretty helpful, pretty easy way. And it's nice because the instructions are pretty easy. I could tell someone else to do it too. But there were that 5% cases where it wouldn't work. And so we had to come up with something better. So what I did, I'll quickly recreate that. So what I did is I wrote a little plugin. It's nothing special. Put that in here, paste those values. I made a little plugin that just transfers the animation from one object to another. And it's assuming you're using Xrefs, and it wants to know the separator. And the separator can be found if you go into the options in the reference tab. It's here. And you want to make sure both Xrefs are using the same separator. They can have the different namespace, that doesn't matter. The important thing is the separator. So this one, our original file is using two colons as the separator. So I'm going to make sure I'm doing the same thing here. Good, I am. What I could do then is take the old one, which would be the source, and the new one, the destination, and just say transfer animation. Set the separator to be the correct thing, of course. Transfer animation, it's going to think a bit. And this is a really brute force way. It literally goes object by object between each Xref and says, hey, do you have animation tracks or keys? No. Okay, next object. Yes, I do. Copy those to the destination, right? Just totally brute force. But it works, and that solved those rare 5% cases. Okay, let's jump into, so animators had requests for certain scripts. You know, we get a lot of people coming over from Maya to come help us out because they've been recruited through Animation Mentor or other ways. And so I asked them, you know, hey, what kind of scripts do you guys use in Maya? And, you know, maybe I can make them. And they pointed out to a script by a guy named Brian Horgan, who's also who's a Cinema 4D Maya user, called bhGhost, and gained a lot of popularity recently. And so they were asking for it, and I kept looking at it and thinking, yeah, I think it could be done in Cinema. And so what it does is you basically specify some geometry, right? I'm going to select my character's body geo right here. And if I run the script called, I have it here, Ghost, right? What it does is it duplicates that body, it duplicates that pose, right? Stores it in a separate group. If I hide it, and it applies the Sketch and Tune display to it. So this gives you kind of like a rough approximation of your pose. And so you can do this on multiple frames throughout, and it helps you really figure out the timing and the spacing of your character's poses, rather than just like an arc, right, which just does a simple line. It tells you if it's got a kink in it. This can actually tell you if it has, you know, if your poses are working well together. So this was a fun endeavor to do that. The nice thing is, like, if you do it on, like, say I were to maybe adjust my pose or something, right? I do something like that. I'm like, oh yeah, that looks great. I want to re-ghost that. I can do that. Oops. You want to make sure you're actually selecting the same geo you were before. And it actually will remove the old one. If it's on the same frame, it'll remove the old one and reduplicate it. So as you're updating your pose, you can rerun this, and you won't get multiple copies. It's smart enough to know to get rid of the old one and use the new one. The last thing I'll show, it's something pretty simple, but they liked a lot. So people coming from Maya tend to use parent constraints a lot for things, right? The nice thing about them is if I have some sort of distance, you know, I can constrain it to where it would behave as if it was a child. And Cinema's parent constraints are kind of funky. They don't always work as you would expect. But the PSR constraints are really robust. The problem with PSR constraints, though, is that if I were to try to make this follow my elbow, right? If I did a PSR constraint, it's going to actually snap it to where my elbow is, right? And a parent constraint would keep it here and do this sort of thing. So I can demo that real quick by adding a parent constraint, right? And when I animate, you can see that sphere is behaving as if it was a child of that cube. So the task was to find a way to use the PSR constraint to replicate this parent constraint behavior. And you can actually do it because the PSR constraint has these offsets that allow you to kind of store a distance and a rotation offset from the object you're constraining to. So we just made a simple script called the faux parent constraint. And you can see that the behavior is the exact same, but it's using a PSR constraint, which you can tell by this tab here and the icon there. So that was one of the scripts we kind of came up with. We came up with other ones, but I'm just about out of time here, and I think that's about all I have. So I guess we can jump to questions if you guys want.
Are your scripts available for download or purchase?
No. But, so these ones are kind of really specific to the Ottoman project, right? I am kind of working in progress to try to make it agnostic to work with the advanced biped template. I just haven't finished it yet. This import weights thing, all the weighting stuff, is available on Cineversity right now. If you have the CV toolbox, right? There's the CV weight scripts. And the script I mentioned that Rick created that lets you do it on a single object, that's actually essentially what the import and export weights custom ones do. They let you specify a specific file name. And then this import weights from directory is this one here, right? So you have the ability to import and export all of them. So some of them are out there, some of them are available, other ones aren't. I can make probably the freeze parent and the faux parent done. I haven't done the ghost one because I wanted to do more. I just haven't finished it yet. Good question, though.